Cool.
Okay.
That'll do.
I want to clap too. Cool. That's very good.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you. Yeah, that was good.
Coordinated dress.
Yeah, right. This is the uniform or something.
Father.
My son.
You want to just get right into it? Yeah.
Sure.
So today we are going to talk about my grandfather,
Yeah.
Anthony's father,
Anthony's father.
who I never met.
Well,
And I don't really know anything about.
I hear you.
I think I'm not even certain his name, but I'm pretty sure it's Pete.
Well, that was it. That was his nickname.
Okay, we can start
Everybody,
with that.
everybody I knew, whoever even referred to him, said Pete. And even I called him Pete.
Rather than Dad?
Rather than Dad or Daddy or,
Oh, wow, okay.
probably because that's what everybody called him. That's who he was.
Yeah, so you're like, yeah,
That's Pete. Yeah,
That's
so,
Pete.
I mean, and it's still, I mean, it seems odd now, but then it made perfect sense, and he didn't mind, so fine. Okay. Well, let's see.
Pete, so what was his
Actual name was John Peyton Porter.
John Peyton.
John Peyton Porter.
Okay,
And
cool.
so those last two you share.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know a lot about him.
Mm-hmm.
I know pretty much nothing about his early life. He never talked about himself, and he was very quiet. And I've been accused of that tendency.
As have I.
Yeah, that's right. And I did learn when I had some genealogy done. I don't know, 10 years ago maybe. I got some info about his father and I guess grandfather.
That's cool.
His father's name was Spencer.
Spencer Porter?
Spencer Porter.
Spencer Porter.
As far as I can tell, his grandfather's name was also Spencer. As far as I can tell, they got that name from the plantation where they I guess, were born, but certainly grew up. And until I did that genealogy, I had always thought he had been born in 1900. Actually, he was born in 1899.
Whoa.
And originally, Peyton was spelled Payton. I don't know when that changed. There wasn't enough documentation to verify much of anything. I know at some point he was boot black, shined shoes
Okay.
as a teenager or child.
Yeah.
And
Back in the good old days.
back in the back in the good old days, yeah, when children were expected to work.
Children could earn their keep.
That's right, and had to if they were going to have a keep, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, this keep ain't keeping itself.
No, you're going to have to do something. My guess is he was on his own pretty early. I don't know if I have a firm date for the death of his parents, but he was born in Mobile, Alabama.
Alabama.
Yeah, which is also where my mother was born, although they didn't meet until they got to Chicago.
Oh, they did the same thing as you and Mom.
Exactly, right. Had to get away and then together. He was, he had been a tailor, probably a tailor's assistant or an apprentice or something like that. But he was extremely good at that craft. And
That's interesting.
and always adjusted and my clothes.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting. Just side note, that's been a interest of mine as well.
really,
And I was thinking about that this morning, about that little side fascination, and I've adjusted a handful of my own clothes and found myself really enjoying it, and
it's an interesting thing to
it's a
do.
fun
I've done a little
thing
and in
to
fact,
connect to him
yes,
too.
right.
Yeah.
In fact, I was just recently, within the last couple of days, trying to remember what happened to your mother's sewing machine.
I have it.
Do you have it?
Yeah, that's what happened.
Well, good. I'm glad it's in the family. Anyway.
Yeah. When that interest was kind of blossomed into an action, I went and asked you one day,
Okay.
and you're like, yeah.
Sure.
Take-
Oh, good. That's good.
Yeah, I've still got it, and I've done a handful of alterations and
Oh, okay.
adjustments, and
Yeah. Well, let's set up a little session or something, because I've got a pair of pants that need fixing that
okay.
are old and cheap, but I like them.
Yeah. There's something. There is something kind of sweet about being able to adjust a piece of clothing or fix it.
Yes.
And I think especially almost more than ever, because the option to just 3 taps have something brand new
Right. Tomorrow
is always
Yeah.
just a half a thought away. And,
Right.
but
Exactly.
to maintain a piece of clothing is even more
Right.
novel.
Yeah.
Well, that's fun. We should do that.
So he had been a tailor,
Like
and
his 20s, maybe 20s, 30s.
Maybe.
Yeah.
maybe
But not when
not when I knew him. No.
not in fatherhood.
When by the time I was born, well, actually, when I was born, I don't know what he was doing. But by the time I was aware of anything, he was red cap.
Red caps.
Schlepping, I don't know, what do they call them now? I don't know if they even exist now. But red caps worked in the railroad station, in a passenger railroad station, and just schlepped bags for the passengers.
When you say schlep, you mean
hauled them,
uh
carried bags for passengers,
uh-huh.
and would put them on the train or take them off when they at arrivals. And one of my earliest memories is of going to the station. He used to work at the Chicago Northwestern Station in Chicago, and was going down there on Sunday afternoon. I don't know whether he was picking up a check or why. But he would take me to a bar. I don't know if it was in the station or nearby. It's a little hard to say. And introduce me to these guys he knew, and buy me a Green River, which was pop soda.
Yeah.
That I think still exists, although I'm not sure of that. But it was bright green. God only knows how it got like that.
Yeah.
But and I'm sure that his association with railroads, is part of the reason that I grew up with an affinity for railroads, and was a model railroader for years and stuff like that, rail fan. About
I
the
kind of vaguely remember that.
it could be.
Yeah.
I might have still had a few things
Yeah.
in the old days.
How old? You might have said this, but how old were you in that scene?
When he was a red cap?
Yeah. And
This would have been up to about
take you to that.
10 or so, I'd say 10. Yeah, not much after that.
Yeah.
Because also when I was little, because he worked for a railroad, I guess one of the arrangements through various and sundry unions or something was that he got passes. And so in the summer, probably my first 4 or 5 years, up until I was about 8 or so, my guess is, my mother and I would go down south to see her people in, well, we'd go to Mobile, but she had a cousin who lived in Fairhope, which was
Alabama.
Fairhope, Alabama, just outside Mobile. I'm sure it's a suburb at this point.
Water jug is excited about your story.
Yeah, so we could go, we could do that because he worked for the railroad. And of course the trips were fairly uneventful, but a very big deal for for a little boy.
To go, go anywhere.
To go much of anywhere, and especially on a train had to be a day and a half, easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that you said this was like a yearly.
Yes.
Yearly
and
trip?
I couldn't say, how many years. I would guess 3 or 4 at least. The last time was probably 54 or so. So I would have been 8. That's about right. And this is irrelevant, but I've got to get it out of my head.
Yeah.
At one point, I think it was our last trip down there. For one reason or another, I got lost. And I stumbled across a schoolhouse. I don't know if somebody took me inside, or I knocked on the door. I don't know how that happened, but I ended up in a class of older children, and and of course, the older girls were just crazy about me, because I was a new little boy, from and someone arranged, for me to get back to our cousins
In Alabama.
in Alabama, and I'm sure there were, it might have been a quarter mile, half mile away. It couldn't have been far, but it was too far for an 8-year-old to find.
To track his way.
With no navigation skills.
Yeah, what? So were you just walking around, maybe?
I guess.
Just exploring and then find
I
yourself
suppose. Right, I suppose.
in a land of giggling older women.
Right, yeah.
Some sort of like Calypso's Island situation.
Yeah, it's just, not a bad thing to happen, So it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and that's,
Wow.
anyway, so
That's funny.
My cousin, I'm not sure when she died. Your mother and I were married. That's really all I remember, because I ended up talking to her niece by marriage or something, in my study. God only knows why. Anyway.
In Minneapolis.
In Minneapolis. So it was in the 90s sometime. So he worked for my father worked for the Chicago and Northwestern until the mid-50s. I couldn't say exactly what year, when he got laid off, which it was just fired, But at that point, passenger trains were on the decline, and people were just starting to fly. There was it just got to be a real option for ordinary folks. And he may have been out of work for a while, I'm not sure. I don't think it was very long. But then he got a job as a janitor for the Chicago Housing Authority, and ended up working at a notorious housing project on the near north side, Cabrini Green.
Cabrini Green.
Cabrini Green. It was tough stuff. And it was really then was just beginning to get really awful.
Damn.
And getting its reputation. But it was always low end because it was a housing project, so nobody really had any money. But in those days,
but it was on a decline.
Yes, but in those days, you could live in the projects without being a criminal. So that there was a lot of poverty, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of crime the way it turned out. With Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor and all that. And then he worked for the Housing Authority till about the mid-60s. I think he retired in '64 because pretty much his lungs gave out.
Is it a smoker?
Yes, Camels, Pall Mall, and
seems like almost it sounds like everyone in those times was a smoker.
Everybody pretty much was. I mean, my mother never smoked. I don't think her sister didn't, but every man I knew smoked.
Yeah.
All my uncles, everybody in the neighborhood.
What you do.
It's what you do. And at this point, I'm sure that he's the reason that my lungs have never been worth a damn. Because I grew up with Camels,
Hmm. You grew up smoking Camels?
No,
Or
no,
just,
but I grew up in Camel smoke.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so I've always had asthma and bronchitis, and I was a very sickly child. I had my first bout of pneumonia when I was 20 months old. I was in an oxygen tent, and I'm sure that's why, because I grew up in a smoker's household.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
but nobody knew.
Yeah.
No
one knew.
Right. And in another 20 years or something, we'll be talking about all the stuff, the horrible things we were doing, in the now that nobody's really aware of. Or very few people are aware of anyway. So he retired.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's taken us such common knowledge now that's not good.
No, not good.
So it's kind of, it's just a side note, and I want you to keep going, but it's like I'm kind of amazed in this moment how you've endured.
I'm a little amazed myself.
I'm seeing a bit of the kind of you have an endurance and
yeah, I don't know. I think
a will to live.
yeah, I suppose. And when I went to high school, for instance, at some point we had to do a physical examination, or you had to turn in the results of this exam or something, and my doctor said the only sport I could do was bowling.
Goddamn. It's a goddamn condemnation.
So, of course, I ignored that. But I mean, I never did any sports in high school, mostly because I didn't have the wind. That wasn't going to happen. I could possibly have done football, but I went to a high school that was brand new. It had been open one semester when I started, and they didn't have any teams. There was a basketball team and a track team by the time I graduated, but the football team was still nascent, and it was too late for all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, in grammar school, I always got good grades and stuff, but I never got perfect attendance because I was always sick. At some point, I was going to miss a couple of weeks, inevitably. Yeah, and I think one thing that helped was when I discovered cycling in the late 70s, I guess.
Yeah.
I'd been riding a bike, here and there along the lakefront recreationally, but when I started working as a bike mechanic, or apprenticing as a mechanic, I began, I got interested and began to alter my bike. This is before I built that one. And I started riding seriously, deliberately, and I'm sure that helped because everything about my physicality improved. And
I know it's low enough aerobic intensity that you could sustain it.
Right.
And you could be working that zone 2.
Exactly. Right. And I could increase it. I could control it. Depending on just by how fast I wanted to go.
So that was probably like the first time that you were able to really be physical.
The first time I could do anything, really seriously, physically hard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
How old were you? Yeah, I can I can imagine.
This was
life changing.
Early 30s, late 30s. Yeah, mid 30s. By the time, my first century must have been about, I was probably 35 or 36.
That's a race?
37.
Century?
It could be a race. It's just 100 miles, a ride. But they were when I say a century, I mean an organized ride.
Yeah.
With a bunch of people. Usually you could do less than that, and sign up for 25 or 50 or whatever you thought made sense. But that period, late 70s, early 80s, was critical. Yeah.
Yeah, because for the first 30 years of your life, you're basically being told and experiencing that.
Just sit down.
Just sit down.
Right.
There's.
Yeah.
And you just weren't able to have a relationship to physicality.
Not much. And I did play ball, basketball and softball and all that kind of stuff, but casually.
Yeah.
In the street half the time.
Yeah, but not as like a.
Yeah, but not in an organized way.
Yeah, and like the element of like athleticism.
Yeah.
That's what came about with cycling.
Right. So.
That would be a game changer.
It was.
Yeah.
So Pete retired in, I think, 64.
Which would have you around like 19.
So I was 19, yeah. And
he had been a janitor for that whole time?
Well, for the previous 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I'm not even sure where we were living at that point. But that was the end of his working. And he hung on another 7 years. With virtually no, medical attention or assistance or anything like that. And I spent most of his time sitting in the front window, as far as I remember.
Huh. Reading or just?
Some.
Existing.
Yeah, he did read though, and neither of my parents was much of a reader. My father did read the paper and magazines, and definitely read more than my mother did. The only book I remember him reading was by a guy who is still one of my favorite authors. I haven't met him in any of his stuff in years. A guy named Chester Himes, who I think wrote mostly in the 40s and 50s. But that was the only book I remember. And because in my childhood home I don't think there was a bookcase. I don't remember one. The only bookcase was the one that had my World Book Encyclopedia. And although neither of them was much of a reader, and neither of them, went past high school,
They just went straight into working.
yeah. And there's no evidence that my father finished high school.
That's not even confirmed.
Although he always said he did. They did get me the World Book 1952 World Book Encyclopedia, and a set of the great books of the Western world. Whenever they came out in the very early '60s, I guess, which was just
Revolutionary.
tremendous. Yeah.
Great books of the Western world. What is that?
It was a set of maybe
Literature?
25 or 30 books. There was some literature, but it was the Western canon, more or less, from Plato and Aristotle and up through Kant and Spinoza and Shakespeare and some more people I can't remember, probably maybe Yeats, I'm not sure. There was some literature and some early science and a lot of philosophy and which I'm sure changed my life, no question about it. I remember using that as using that as a basis for a term paper I wrote in high school, kind of a survey of great Western philosophers.
Yeah, that had to have changed your fucking life. Changed your view of what was even possible and what.
Yes.
For you and.
Right, and there are a lot of different ways to think.
Yeah, I'm thinking of this is a little aside because I do want to keep a bit of on track on this, but that I see those kinds of sets in people's homes because I visit a lot of older people, and I frequently see those kinds of sets, and I'm like, every time I'm like, this is like fascinating, amazing, and I wish I had this. I'm increasingly, I have these waves of wishing for some basis of knowledge.
Well, it's interesting.
I guess wishing for the thing that I would have gotten if I had gone to college, had I gone down the more traditional path. Mm-hmm. But maybe not even then, because it sounds like that's a turbulent place.
It is now.
And you getting a clear basis of knowledge is not guaranteed.
No.
But that's amazing, and maybe I can see that.
Yeah.
I should find a way to respond to that. Maybe I should just get myself a collection of great books of the world and get myself that liberal arts degree that I seem to be craving.
Get your own, yeah. In fact, I'm not sure when this happened. I guess it was when we left Minneapolis. But I'm pretty sure the great books were in the living room. They were at least visible somewhere because Jai asked me for them. And at some point, one of the Shakespeare volumes had gone missing. I don't know how that happened. But he found one somewhere, and as far as I know, that set is in his living room now.
Oh, cool.
Probably.
It continues on.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Well, everything in there is as valid now as it, as it ever was.
Yes. It's,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and I'm glad they're still around.
yeah, me too.
That was over 60 years ago. They've been around. So from 64 when he retired until 71.
And it was around there that you got that set.
Is
that right?
The set was earlier. That would have been, I'd say, no later than 61, maybe.
Okay.
Because I used them for
You were in high
a
school.
term paper,
Yeah.
and I left in 62, so it might have been 1960 even. I'm not sure when they showed up. So from 64 to 71, I don't know what he did. I was working and going to school.
You were away. You moved out.
No, I lived there.
Oh.
I didn't actually leave home until I was 24, I guess.
Me too.
And and because I was working and going to school, but I didn't have money for tuition and rent, So, and even in this is 1970. When I rented an apartment, it was really for my girlfriend, who was, was conflicting with her mother. They were going through that mother-daughter phase.
Mm-hmm. Where one might eat or kill the other.
Yes, one or the other. Yeah, somebody's got to go though. And so I rented an apartment just outside the neighborhood for her, and. So I spent a lot of time there, but my stuff was still at home.
But there was this period of time though that you weren't aware of him. You guys weren't.
No, I mean we saw each other, ate together sometimes, but I was hardly ever there. I was either working or at school or
with a girlfriend,
running the streets. Yeah,
sounds about right.
Yeah, right. When this was the early 20s, so I was doing my job.
Yeah.
And then then in 71, early 71, I actually moved out. Rented another apartment, but this was preparatory to getting married. So 71, I moved out in the spring, March or April, I'd say. And then in June, on Saturday, June 5th, I got married on Saturday, and then Monday I graduated from Roosevelt. And then in December, my father died. And he had,
What year? Say that
this
year.
is 71. He had been sick that earlier in the fall, September or something. And spent some time in the hospital, and which I think was the first time he had been in that I knew about. So he was in the hospital for a while, and then was home for a while, and then went back in December, mid-December, I guess. Yeah, and then died on the December 22nd, 71. And the last time I saw him, he wasn't really conscious. You know, we held hands, but it might have just been me holding. It's so hard to say at this point. At home, I mean, you know, when I was a child, although I was confident, I suppose, if I ever thought about it, that both my parents cared for me, loved me. My mother was fearful, I'd say, and
Just generally.
just generally, yeah. And you know, God knows what her early life was like, being born in 1909 in Mobile, Alabama. You know, and I'm sure it was fraught with all kinds of things I can't
Things
imagine.
to be afraid of.
Yeah, a lot of things to be afraid of.
And then having a child.
Yeah,
I hear,
Yeah,
especially for
focuses all
mothers.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a whole nother
right. Takes it to another
deep
level.
level of
Exactly.
possible anxiety.
Yeah. And I mean, this is not something I don't think I ever thought about as a child. But in, you know, closing in on whatever is coming up, I've done a lot of reflection, which I guess is fairly common. And thinking about, you know, how our influences and what was actually going on and what I thought was happening. And at this point, I think he was kind of a second-class citizen at home. And
What does that mean?
well, I think my mother cared for him. I think she loved him, but she didn't respect him. And he was also a heavy drinker for most of his life. I mean, he stopped drinking, you know, the last several years, but I'm sure the booze didn't help any, it didn't help his physical condition.
Smoking and
At
drinking.
all. Smoking and drinking the whole time.
All day?
Probably.
A little bit, at least, like a drip.
I remember.
All day, every day.
I remember finding gin bottles in the coal bin in the you know, because we had a coal stove, and the coal man would come by once a year, and there was a window in the back, and this is some unnecessary nostalgia, I guess, but the coal man would come and dump, you know, I don't know, a ton, 2 tons, whatever you had ordered.
The year's worth of coal.
On the street, yep, on the street, and leave a guy, his helper, who would then wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow take it through to the backyard around and dump it in a window that emptied into the coal bin in the basement, which was next to the stove. So you would shovel the coal into the stove, and you know, you'd have to bank the fire and all that kind of stuff. But once by the end of the winter, there wasn't much coal there, you know. And I remember finding gin bottles in the coal bin, and you know, behind stuff on a ship.
In the bin.
Yeah. Because he knew my mother wasn't going to go in the coal bin because she didn't do the fires. So that was a safe place. And yeah, because that was man's work. Or if there was a man around, that was his job.
Yeah, yeah. So then you were shoveling coal too then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, when I was very small, I remember my grandfather doing it, because until I was about 4, I think, it was my mother and father and my mother's mother and father and I all in this same house. And I remember being in the basement with my grandfather when he was maybe lighting the pilot. That could be, for the water heater or something. And I think that's why I have hardly any eyebrows now. Because I got too close, yeah. I remember that incident, but that I just remember it happening. So I was marked then. Yeah. So although I didn't see much of my father, and we hardly ever had heart-to-heart talks.
He didn't talk much.
He didn't talk much. I didn't talk much. But for several years, probably until I got well into maybe just into my teens. On most Saturdays, when the weather was decent and he was off, we would go fishing. And which is why I took you and drug you and Joe fishing over in Worth Park that time. That was kind of an homage to my time with my old man. And we would go fishing out, usually in the forest preserves, not very far. And when I was, say 7 to 13, something like that.
Like every week?
Frequently.
Yeah.
Every week is unlikely, but a couple times a month. Anyway.
Pretty regular, yeah.
And that was some of our best time together.
Yeah.
And mostly, I think, so we could be together without my mother being there, without another influence.
I suspect that's really critical.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Sure.
Yeah.
And those are some of my, fondest memories.
Yeah.
Of our being able to, to be together, talk as much as we wanted to.
You guys would talk?
Yeah, not much.
Yeah.
But
would you were you keeping him updated on school and life and things like that? Was that a part of the conversations?
Some, not much. I think the way I think of it now is that most of our communion was nonverbal, and just being in each other's presence, and enjoying it. Was the main thing for me anyway. And I suspect for him too, but I can't verify that. So, and So in '71, I've got to say this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go for
Uh,
it.
in '71, I don't know what day this was, and I don't know why I would have been at home, but I think maybe it was just that my wife at the time started very early. She was a clerk in an emergency room, and she had gone to work.
You were like 26.
I was 26. I had just turned 26. And my mother called and said that, well, actually, she said Pete passed. And I don't, I mean, that was probably the first time I cried in God knows how long, you know, at 26. There wasn't anything to cry about. And so I called Jennifer, and she, you know, came home, and we got through the next, you know, week and a half or however long it took to for the wake and funeral and all that. And I remember I was working at Osco. God, what an awful job. But there was no compassionate leave or anything like that in those days. So, but I was at work, and one of the other young guys, you know, clerk, or I guess he was, said, whom I hardly knew because I had only been there a few months, you know. Actually, it must have been about a month, 6 weeks or something. But he said, maybe jokingly, probably, you look like you lost your best friend. And I said, I think I did. You know, hadn't really thought about it like that, but he had, because my mother had been a force to reckon with. And at home, he was fairly passive. He just, you know, let it go. I don't know.
He more opted for maintaining the peace of the state.
Yes.
Than asserting the rules of the state necessarily.
Right. Yeah. And I was rarely there. I mean, that's the most important thing. I was just passing through once, passing through for the most part. And I remember at one point, and this was pretty late in his life anyway. I think I was still living there. So this might have been 1970, maybe. I don't know what she was angry about. Could have been most anything. And he was sitting at the kitchen table, and she just smacked him upside the head. Just, you know, I don't think I had been in the conversation. I just knew she was, you know, pissed off about something, but that was not unusual.
That should hit him.
No, that she was upset was
That
not unusual. That was the first time I saw anybody, either of them, hit the other one.
Oh, okay.
Because it wasn't that kind of, you know, family. But and that was, you know, one of the first times, maybe not first, but one of the few times I got bigger, you know, and I didn't actually threaten her, but I let her know that you can't do that.
Yeah.
This is involving more than you know, and stop.
Yeah.
And I think she was shocked, understandably, I guess.
Yeah, she'd probably never been in contact with the the protector in you.
Right.
As maybe you hadn't either.
No, probably not.
And someone new entered into the family in that moment.
Yeah, right. And so things did change, but she stopped.
Yeah.
And that's all I know. This is just a memory that that stuck with me.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can imagine.
Yeah. So.
Because it seems like you really, you had a love for your dad, and and a friendship that maybe wasn't quite the same with your mom.
No, it wasn't. And I loved her, and I did what I could for her, and when she couldn't do for herself, she came to live with us, and I gave her everything I could.
Yeah. But there was some walls. She had some walls.
Yeah.
Like there's still love and care, but like
sure.
It seems like.
Yeah.
She walls up.
I mean, my take now is that she had some inner anxiety that I couldn't get to or do anything about, and it really had nothing to do with me. But if you're going to be around her, it'll be noticeable.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just never know. Yeah. So
you had brought up this term second-class citizen, and it seems like in relation to your dad, and it seems like by that you mean he was very much in he was like, for lack of a better word, subordinate in service to, he was yielding to the just needs of the family, needs of your mom, and wasn't asserting really anything. He was just responding.
Right.
And
I mean, he was. Yeah, that's a good service. Good term. I think he seemed to me to be in service to the family.
Yeah.
And
maybe a little kind of a slave. A little bit.
In a way.
But not completely, but he wasn't the captain.
He was not the captain. No.
Yeah.
No. And I mean, in some ways, and maybe in some contexts, I was the captain. Clearly a bad idea, but I remember we always rented. They never had a house. I remember they apparently got a chance to buy a house. My mother had lots of friends. One of her friends, who lived in the neighborhood, had a nice house and a not so nice house next to it, and somehow they got a chance to buy this not so nice house.
Your parents or your
my
mom?
parents?
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know when this would have been, maybe early 60s, something like that. Or even earlier, actually, now that I think about it, because I was pretty young. And my mother asked me what I thought.
Of that house, or
Yeah.
what they should do.
Yeah, do you think, or would you like to, or something, I don't know. And it was clearly a not so nice house, so I said no. No, I don't,
The hell?
it's wooden, it's not even brick, I mean, I don't think I went into detail, but
How old
I
are you?
mixed it. Well, I'm guessing about 12. The kind of person you want to ask about real estate advice.
It's just, it's hilarious. But,
Yeah, it's goofy.
well, I don't know. I clearly in ways it's goofy, but I sense something. Well, just at a psychological level, like metaphorical level or something. I've been thinking more about the Son and Jesus and we're all on brand in our Christian exploration and talking about Father.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, it's all the same. And the Son being like, look upon the Son and you'll know the Father. Like you'll know the reason why. You'll know
How that happened, yeah.
And the Son being like metaphorically the point of the family, like the point of the triangle, and so if not literally a good idea all the time, I can understand the spirit of it. I think there's an essence of it that is right, but it came out a little maybe too literal with you guys. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Oh boy.
What time is it? I know you have.
It's a little after 11.
Oh, okay, so
We're okay.
Okay, cool. Let's take a little pause, halftime.
Okay.
And then come back around.
Fine.
Cool. So we've got like maybe 20 minutes or so.
Okay.
The last little run. I would like to, if it's okay, have this section of the podcast be more slanted and interview based, where I'm,
Okay.
if you'll allow me to just indulge my curiosity and psychological analysis. Cool. And I kind of feel like, I mean, there's a whole lot of really interesting stuff for me, but I want to, go that kind of route. Okay. And thank you for indulging me.
Sure.
My curiosity, and for sharing those stories.
Sure, you're more than welcome.
I thought was good for you.
Yeah. No, just it's good. I mean, all that's it's stuff you should probably know. It might be useful, it might not, but
yeah, it is. It is.
It's okay.
Yeah, okay, so where do I want to begin here? Yes, I'm getting the picture and like essence of him that I'm getting is, yeah, he said he was a quiet man.
Yes.
He was very much in service, in response
Mm-hmm.
to, and something that stood out in those memories you shared of you guys going fishing and how a lot of your time together was just enjoyed silently, just being each other's presence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like how you guys communed in a lot of the way. And I think I'm just generally, and I'm thinking out loud a bit here about where I want to like, where my slant is, but I'm just, yeah, I'm curious about like, well, in that element of his quietness, so did he give you those books, those Great Western books, or was that like a joint parent
There was, yeah,
thing?
joint as far as I could tell, yeah.
That's just really interesting to me. I'm not sure I have anything really to talk about there, but it's just really interesting to me in terms of, well, I see that as like, that was this like really important gift of the Spirit of the Father to you. The Spirit, and I'm thinking in terms of psychologically, the spirit of Western culture, of Western thought, of positive guidance, like that he wasn't as much doing. He wasn't representing really. Mm-hmm. He wasn't representing that spirit exactly. He was representing parts of the Father.
Right.
But them giving you those books was that kind of act.
Right. Yeah, and
putting forth a structure
right.
that wasn't just in response, but like a offering of this really positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just.
And my guess is that, well, I would be surprised if the impetus for that purchase. And I remember them making payments on it, so it wasn't just an offhand kind of thing. But I'd be surprised if that didn't come about because somebody persuaded them to do it. My guess is, a door-to-door salesman, because there were a lot of people doing that in those days.
Yeah.
Selling any number of things, from flower seeds to insurance to, and I wouldn't be surprised if the World Book Encyclopedia came about in essentially the same way. And just because, as far as I knew, I don't know of any contact they had with any kind of academic world. And
yeah, because they hadn't read those books.
No. No.
You were that's part of what struck me too, is like that was part of like the go forth and take the torch further.
Right. Exactly. It was they had
Whether
they
they were not conscious of that, but I think
no
a part of them. That was.
yeah they had faith in formal education.
Mm-hmm.
They had faith in the benefits of reading, and they had the faith in learning, just generally. They hadn't
They hadn't gotten to that.
They hadn't didn't get a crack at that, but they wanted me to have it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm forever grateful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Right?
Yeah.
That they gave me something to feed my intellect. Because I'm sure that made all the difference. I mean, it's not. That's why I'm
Part of who you are today.
That's why I'm like this. That's part of why I'm like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
in the path you went down, and the degree you went and got, and
all that. Yes.
and
Right.
basically a life of being a thinker.
Yeah, I think
in a lot of ways, and
certainly being a thinker, and I'm sure that was all part of my developing into whatever this is. But
this,
yeah, this
current
melange here, and in large part that's why I got a degree. I mean, it took me 9 years. I had a lot to get a bachelor's from 62 to 71.
I didn't know that.
I went because I was all. I mean, the first year I just went to school, to college, but from then on I was working and going to school. Often just taking required stuff that folks said I should have,
right?
And I knew I was going to need, but I had certainly had no career focus, or any real fields I wanted to learn more about, or anything I wanted to pursue in particular, and that's part of the reason it took so long. I took a lot of different courses and changed my major, 3 or 4 times. So
just exploring,
because I wanted to know more about. I wanted to know about more things.
Yeah, need more data.
More data.
Yeah.
And I ended up with. I eventually got a degree because I was tired of being there. So I kind of added up, talking to a counselor, I guess, or somebody, realized that in addition to the kind of goofy marketing and accounting courses I took, just exploration.
Yeah.
That almost every semester I had taken a psychology course, because I wanted to know about me and people. That was really my interest. Although I don't think I ever articulated it or thought about it seriously, but that was behind it. And so that was the degree I ended up with, because I had the most courses, so that was going to be the simplest way out.
And the counselor just saw a theme, like,
right.
All right.
Yeah. I want to try this. So that's how it came about, accidental as much as anything. Although I think there was a
theme,
an unspoken, unacknowledged impetus there.
That's what a counselor's supposed to do.
Find that,
articulate it.
Right. So, and it was, in some ways, it was unfortunate because I didn't get good grades in college for the most part, because I wasn't I was there as an explorer. I wasn't really, all that serious about anything. I was just trying to learn as much about as many different fields as I could manage.
Yeah.
And so my grades weren't good enough to get me into graduate school, and a bachelor's in psychology will get you a job at a gas station then. so it didn't really amount to much, but that was okay. It's fine, it got me out, and that was the main thing. I think I've forgotten how this started now.
That I was.
Oh, their gift of knowledge to me.
Mm-hmm,
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And just noting how important that was.
Yes.
And I was particularly seeing it through the lens of the father's spirit in the household, and how that it occupied a certain part and role function of the father spirit that it sounds like your dad wasn't able to totally live out.
That's reasonable. One thing that occurs to me is that, I always knew that they loved me.
Yeah.
In a pinch, I would go to my old man. Like when I got my first traffic ticket, I don't know that I even told my mother, because she would just give me shit and and be of no real help.
Practically.
Yeah. And if I was short of money, I would ask him. He didn't hardly had 2 nickels to rub together, but if I needed $10, I could get it with no conversation, with no harassment or
did you ask
anything
him
untoward.
Did you ask him for help much?
Not much, no.
Just whenever you were
Just
in a pinch.
now and then, if in a pinch, I knew I could count on him, and I felt I could count on him in ways that I couldn't count on my mother. Mm-hmm. At least not without harassment to go along with it.
Yeah, like she'd be there, but it would come at like a
It would
cost.
be a cost. That's right. It would cost me. Yeah. Right.
You have to pay for that assistance.
Right. So is it? Do we need to do this? And so in some ways, I felt like we were more allies than like my mother and I were. Mm-hmm. And she was a promoter and all that, but the feeling was different, at least for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But those
it's almost
books,
like she was the. I'm thinking just kind of archetypally here. As usual.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be more self-conscious about that, or self-aware about it. That fact of how I think all the fucking time. She was kind of acting as the spirit of maybe judgment.
Sure.
In the household, your
could
father,
count on it.
whereas your father was more acting out the spirit of, to put it in those, mercy.
Yes.
He was more the hand of mercy. She was more the hand of judgment.
Yes.
Is that?
That sounds right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but yes.
Yeah.
Right.
That spirit was at play.
Mm-hmm. And it's not that he didn't correct me, as a child, and but
there was, yeah, okay. He was involved in like discipline and.
Sure. I was a well-behaved child, though it didn't come up very much, because that was clearly, not the easiest path to take. There were, but when it did, and something was off, if I could just deal with him, I'd be way ahead of the game. And whatever it is, is likely to be fixed more simply than if my mother were involved. Yes, efficiently. Yeah. So, yeah, and I always felt I could count on him in ways I couldn't count on my mother. At least not without a lot of, ancillary reaction and hysteria.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever go to your parents for like? I have this question, then I have another one after this. But did you ever go to your dad for like advice? And like, so he'd be there for like practical issues of like being short on money or being in trouble or something. But did you ever go to him for advice or like counsel or talk to him about, well, I guess you said you didn't really have many heart-to-hearts.
I can't say and I don't remember doing that. And it's not to say it didn't happen, but it didn't happen much, if it happened at all.
Yeah, and no like real striking examples at the
moment. No. I mean, in retrospect, I was remarkably self-directed as a child. And I was well behaved, and I got good grades, so I could pull it off. There was no reason for anybody to oppose me. So
yeah, it's kind of like me.
Yeah, a lot like you. Yes, right. Yeah. So no, I don't think so.
Yeah. What So now I'm curious about so he was very much in response to you and the needs of the household and to your mom. It seems like one of the active things he was doing with you was these fishing excursions. Did he like impart lessons upon you? Did he?
Not directly.
Not directly.
Sometimes he would, and this too is when I was young. I'd say, preteen anyway. Sometimes he would take me with him to when he'd go visit one of his friends. 2 or 3 in particular, and so his lessons were really all by example.
Yeah, he would take you places.
He would take me places,
Mm-hmm.
and so I could experience different environments, just other households. He took me to the racetrack fairly often. If we weren't fishing, then sometimes we would be at a racetrack.
Oh, that's fun.
So I got to see him in different contexts, and I could see how he behaved and how people treated him, and of course none of this was formal or spoken or anything. It's just
But this is how a lot was being learned.
Sure,
Yeah.
because I was
And a lot does
observant. I'm paying attention anyway. But his lessons were, as far as I can tell, were all nonverbal. And I always felt like he had a lot of faith in me. He had a lot of confidence in my ability to function, to learn what I needed to learn, and do what needed doing. He wasn't anxious, like my mother was. And no matter how justified any of that was, that was my perception.
Yeah.
Not directly then, but in retrospect, I can see how
The way he acted
were,
with you.
how things were.
That's basically
Right.
Yeah. You've been able to deduce that. Yeah, which is invaluable.
Mm-hmm. Not always easy to articulate, but effective and just the same.
And real, like
absolutely real.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something I've told you. That's something I've realized over the years myself with you. That was imparted. Was a basic confidence in my ability to deal, and not necessarily advice on how to deal with it, but a basic confidence in my ability to deal, and I can see. I can imagine and I can see in certain people that I know who didn't have that kind of thing, that it makes a fucking massive difference if your father has that, if he's even there, but and also if he has that level of confidence.
I suppose
It's kind of because it all gets communicated.
Oh, sure.
Regardless.
Yeah, whether you're thinking about it or not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I can't say that it was deliberate. That approach was deliberate on my part. There wasn't a lot of forethought going on.
Yeah. I know you were.
This was gut.
Going by your
pure
nose
gut.
And and certain trusting just the process of seeing things through.
Right. Right.
And the grace that is revealed in that.
Mm-hmm.
And
and that if you're lucky, you'll perceive. Yeah, you do have to pay attention. In fact, I saw a good quote. I can't get it right now though. From Mary Oliver. That was something like attention leads to affection. Well, that's further than I want to go this morning. But that's the idea. Just pay attention. You'd be surprised what'll show up.
Yeah. Yeah, seems like, well, I think of lines of like, yeah, attention is currency.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the currency of life, whether that's with people or yourself or anything. Like what you give attention to is becomes what affects you, and you affect it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the basis of affect. Well, it's probably about right on the money.
Right on the money. Yeah. Boy.
Cool.
This was astounding.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thanks
That was a
for
real
thank you for that.
autobiography here. Yeah.
I'm in the spirit of staccato and the 5 rhythms, and we just had the staccato day this last month, and seems to be the fat case where each day then becomes this initiation, and then the month carries out in the spirit of it, and that's and a big part of staccato is it's the realm of if flowing is the internal and motherly feminine domain, staccato is the external fatherly relationships, explicit communication, definitions, and so this is where I am, and this is all very staccato, staccato activities, and and I'm just, as I'm in that, I'm admiring and honoring you for that autobiography and defining, giving voice to you and your the Father Spirit in you, and all the love and honor to John.
Yes.
John Pete Peyton.
Yeah. I don't know where the Pete came from. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, because his friends always called him Pete Porter.
Pete Porter. Pete Peyton Porter.
I don't know.
John.
Yeah, John Peyton Porter. He was a good man. Yeah.
Yeah, he sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, I think he did the best he could. My current favorite song is called "Don't Do It." It's an old, originally done by Marvin Gaye, a really weak version, and then the band did it, and found the meat in there, and one of the lines is, "I'm doing the best I can."
Yeah.
I was doing the best I can.
Yeah.
And I think that's all that's necessary. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's something that is important for me to remember and remind myself of. I've gotten kind of disconnected or just far detached over some years, or a side effect of the way I've been living, which is not. There's been many effects, and many of them have been very, very good. But there's been a side effect of a certain detachment from my own ideals and where they come from, which is out of me. And yeah, I can spend I've spent a lot of time just kind of crushed by my or just the feeling ends up being a feeling of being crushed by my ideals, but just too far away from them. I'm too far away from like where how the ideal comes about, which is just doing the best you can.
Yeah.
And it's something I need to give more attention to.
Yeah, well,
that attitude.
Most of us could give it more attention, I think, because I think for a lot of us anyway, it's easy to half-step, not to give it your best, not to try as hard as you can.
Yeah.
Because I guess there's a bigger risk if it doesn't work.
It's more obvious failure.
Yes, right. It's a little harder to take, but which I think we've got to do it anyway. It's risky, yeah. But the easiest thing is failure or mediocrity or something. That's,
you don't have to try.
That takes no effort at all. Yeah. Just give it up. Shoot for it.
Yeah, and I think just that basic, it's almost cliche, and I can sense part of myself, and probably a lot of people in my age range that would like maybe even roll their eyes at that phrase of doing the best you can. Which is good to see, but it's like it really is to be taken seriously. That notion of doing the best you can, not only in like the sense of like being more than mediocre, which is also important, but in the sense of that being enough, like that assertion, I think I'm just sensing in myself, I don't take seriously enough. Like I think through enough that doing my best is enough, and whatever that is, and that takes that's where things like humility are useful, because it will help you relax into how that translates.
Right, however it shakes out, yeah. Yeah.
But that is the game. That is the game. It's just giving what you do have.
Right, whatever that is today, because it might not be the same tomorrow, but that's okay.
Yeah, and I think I've spent a lot of time. I don't need to spend too much time on this because you need to go, but like I can just, I've gotten into a trap of sensing what I could be, seeing that in other people, seeing like glimpses of that spirit in other people,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of implicitly, reactively getting into a place of trying to essentially give what I don't have, like seeing a glimpse of something that could be more and is not me yet,
Mm-hmm.
and then trying to give that,
Mm-hmm.
and just being disconnected from like just the personal. It's about giving what you do have,
Mm-hmm.
giving what I do have, and that's all that's necessary.
So is that a disconnect from reality?
I would say so.
That's what it sounds like from here. I don't know. Just checking. Okay. On that note.
Yeah, next episode.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Themes of sacrifice. Something I've been thinking about, and I'm rethinking that word, my relationship to that word, and seeing that it's something I've been like. There's serious issues with it. It's gotten commandeered. But it's something that needs to be understood.
Yeah.
Not just like brushed aside.
Especially the sacred part of that, the first part of that.
The sakra, Yep. And I think part of how I'm connecting to it is this spirit of you don't kill something. You give of yourself.
Right.
And that becomes like you are the sacrifice, but don't literally die,
no,
because Jesus died for you, and,
right.
and so you don't have to. So just like give of yourself,
right?
And
what a relief.
and there's something very important and fundamentally valuable in that I'm trying to unpack more and sensing in my own life.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
That'll do.
I want to clap too. Cool. That's very good.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, that was good.